Okay, in this video we're going to briefly talk about that process that we've alluded to a couple of times called normalization. Now sometimes it's obvious how your data should be organized into tables. Other times it might not be so obvious. Is there a set of guidelines or rules dictating how you should design the columns belonging to relational database tables? Well, yes, there is, and that process is, in fact, normalization. There are forms of normalization, each form representing a series of steps or rules. The more steps that you take, the more normalized your tables are considered to be. If you use the first three steps, then somebody might say, well, or you might say, I've normalized to the third normal form. Okay, so there are about 7 forms, I think, maybe 8, but most people only normalize to the second normal form, maybe the third. In this video, I'm only going to show you the first 2. Now, you don't have to memorize all the steps, all 7 forms. I certainly don't. After some practice, you're going to normalize to an acceptable degree, and you'll be able to normalize data in your sleep. You'll be able to see data the way it should be organized once you see it done a couple of times without really having to follow the rules verbatim. So again, I'm only going to discuss the first 2 forms. I'll explain more about that in just a moment. All right, so the first normal form, the guidance goes something like this. Remove repeating columns by creating a new table, moving the columns into the new table, and linking back to the old table in a one-to-many relationship. All right, so in this particular example, you can see the before and the after. In the before, you have a customer order table. And here there is both a first order date, first order account, or amount. Second order date, second order amount. If they order a third time, then you would add a third piece of information. Third order date, third order amount. So you can see there's going to be a lot of redundancy on that one line or that one row of data. So in order to break that up and to make it into 2 smaller tables, you would create a customer table and an order table for this particular example. You would take away, again, all of the moving the columns into the new table that are repeating, like first order date, first order amount, and so on, and you move those into another table, the order table, and then you create a relationship back to the customer table in a one-to-many relationship. So one customer can have multiple orders in this example. So the order has things like order date and order amount, and then also a customer ID that links back as a foreign key relationship to the primary key in the customer table. Okay, so that makes sense, right? I mean, you wouldn't, it doesn't make sense if one of your customers is ordering 57, has 57 orders. You don't want to just keep adding fields to the end of your table. It makes more sense to split those up into 2 tables, right? Okay, so that's first normal form. All right, so moving on to the second normal form, the guidance reads like this. Move repeating fields into a new table that contains a primary key and relate it back to the old table using a foreign key. All right, so we see that there are there are 2 situations in the before that we're trying to resolve. First of all, Bob Tabor belongs to 2 different companies. Maybe he has changed companies over time. And then there's records 2 and 4 that have 2 different contacts for the Red Dwarf Incorporated organization. And so in both of those cases, we have repeating fields. And we're supposed to remove those repeating fields to a table that contains a primary key. So we're going to take those repeating fields, first name, and take the repeating fields for company name, and essentially think of those as 2 separate entities and put them in 2 different tables and set a primary key, foreign key relationship between the 2. And that's exactly what we did in the after. Now you can see that we have an accounts or company that would include the account name and the number of employees, and then a contacts table that would include the actual employees themselves. So if an employee moves from company to company, he can change which account he's associated with now in the database. All right, so at this point, that level of normalization makes most people comfortable. When it comes to normalization, the phrase too much of a good thing could definitely come to mind once you go beyond second normal form. It starts getting a little nutty. There's probably merit to it and benefit, but honestly, I rarely go beyond this. Now, if you want to learn more, you should check out Wikipedia's entry on database normalization. Okay, it has more details than you probably need, but it's there if you're curious, and it does a fairly good job of explaining it. So it's generally regarded amongst developers of databases that you shouldn't necessarily strive for normalization nirvana. You don't need to get to all 7 or 8 forms of normalization. Most people, at least at first, never really go past second normal form like I've just showed you here because it's too confusing. I once heard a DBA use this phrase, normalize until it hurts, denormalize until it works. And I really like that because it aptly described my own thoughts. Too much normalization makes working with the data a real headache. You have to do a bunch of table joins, which we'll look at in tomorrow's videos, whenever you're doing SQL queries and so forth. Denormalization, then, is the process of stepping backwards through the normalization steps until you get something that's comfortable and workable. So that pretty much wraps it up for all I really want to say about normalization. It's a way of taxonomizing your fields of information into the correct tables based on redundancy that you might experience, whether conceptually thinking through it or seeing it in somebody else's work. The act of splitting out entities into their own tables is something that you'll get intuitive. At least you can think in second normal form at some point in your life, and then you might have to push to third normal form to think in that regard. That's all I got to say about it. Hope that made a little bit of sense to you, and hope you enjoyed the video. See you in the next video. Thank you.